Another 2 minutes to the deadline.
What am I not learning Mishnah for? I thought it was
Already the deadline.
It gives us extra time sometimes.
Is, what happened to Batal?
He's coming.
It's coming.
Not done.
Be careful you don't fall to sleep when that's what they call in Yiddish Balbatische Winkel. That's so what happens to people that sit in chairs like this is they usually go to sleep.
We're gonna go to sleep.
All right, so Be'ez Hashem, we're beginning the class with the first pasuk in this week's parsha. So at the end of Parsha B'Shalach, we had the whole description of Yerida Saman, and then we had the story of Melchem Samolin, called the War of Amalek. Then we all of a sudden begin this parsha with the fact that Yisro, that he is a very big leader in the non-Jewish world at that time. As a well-known, he was one of the leading advisors to Paro. And you know the story about the advisors of Paro. There was Eoy was also one of them. How do you call him? Job, Eoy. He was one of the advisors, and so was Yisro. And Bilam, he was also. So he said, he said to Paro, he should get rid of him. You understand? One at a time. And Job, he sort of, he remained like on the fence. And that's why the Gemara says in Bava Basra, that's why he got the 70 years of suffering. In other words, when it comes to key issues, it's not good to sit on the fence. You follow? That's just a way of avoiding, in a not good way, avoiding the issue. So he had to suffer Yisurim for that, Eoy. Yeah. And how they call him, Yisro, he fled. He didn't want to, at that point, he didn't want to say yea or nay, but he fled. And Bilam, we all know what happened with him. We all know the story of Bilam. So Yisro, he's a very leading figure in the non-Jewish world. He was one of the big advisors of Paro, and Rashi tells us that there wasn't one, leading Avodah Zarah. We're not talking about the small fry, but the leading Avodah Zarahs, that he hadn't tried it, Yisro. So he was very, by the non-Jewish world, he was very learned, as to use the expression. He was like the big academical faculty of everything that wasn't Kedusha. He was very powerful, and he had a big word. He had a big pull with all the leaders of the different sects and the leaders of the different countries. He was a big note, Israel. So all of a sudden, it's written that Yisro he heard something. And after he'd heard that, he came out to the desert where Moshe Rabbeinu is, and all the Yidden, they're all in the Midbar. Yeah, Midbar is not a very easy place to be, as we see, from all the developments that later occurred. So Yisro all of a sudden comes out, and he wants to be Midgayer. You follow? So here we have a guy that he represented the whole powerful, learned, in inverted commas, non-Jewish world, and what you might call cultural, spiritual power. He had like cultural and spiritual power. And he comes all the way out to the desert, and he greets his son-in-law Moshe, and he's bottled Legamri to Moshe, and he becomes Miskaya. Yeah. That's not a very positive Maisa, not a very simple thing. So let's see what Rashi has to say about that. And then that'll lead us into a further discussion of, in order to sort of throw a certain light on the whole thing we're going to talk about, I want to tell you a story, like I always tell a story. But this story is from the time of Rebbe Shimon, the time of Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai and his Talmidim. And you know that on Lag BaOmer, Rebbe Shimon was Mistalik, and that was his Yom Mistalkes, and he was, everybody standing around. That was his Yom Mistalkes, and he was buried in Meron. There was a whole discussion about that. It's written at the end of the Zohar, but there were a couple of other places that they wanted he should be. And it's mashma that the Rashbi himself said that they should bury him in Meron. So he had quite a number of great students, the Rashbi. And it's an amazing thing that in any field of learning in Yiddish, it doesn't matter where, whether it be in Mishnah, whether it be in the Gemara, whether it be in the Brises, whether it be in the Toseftas, whether it be in Medrashim, whether it be in the Sifri and the Sifro, but they're also Medrashim. Everywhere you meet up with Rebbe Shimon. There's not one portion of the Torah where he's not there. It's absolutely mind-boggling. Yeah. And throughout Chassidus, you'll notice that many of the great quotes that are brought in Chassidus to support certain basic themes are all in the name of the Rashbi. You can notice it, yeah. I could show you some example. So he had some very great Talmidim. One of them was called Rebbe Chia, and that's mashma, that's a Rebbe Chia who's mentioned in the Gemara. And Rebbe Chia, he was a, no, you can't do that. You have to bring a chair and sit here.
Every time.
Well, whenever you're late, you sit close.
He always sits close. RABBI GAFNI likes something to sit next to him.
So Rebbe Chia was a very great figure. And then there was Rabbi Abba. We won't go into all their histories and everything. Rabbi Yossi, they were the very close, devoted Talmidim of the Rashbi. And they sort of, wherever he was, they were there not only to learn from him, but also to, what you might call, be Meshameshim. And they were with him at the moment of the the Stokers, when he passed away, they were with him. So after the Stokers, Rebbe Chia, he just had no world. He was shattered completely, and for months he just was completely out of action. He couldn't take the world anymore without the Rashbi. So all of a sudden he decided, Rebbe Chia, that he wants to make a visit upstairs, and he wants to talk with the Rashbi. He wants to meet him. And this is brought down in the Zohar Kodesh, in the Hagdoma, not inside the Zohar Kodesh, but there's a whole, about 20 amudim of the Zohar Kodesh, which are called the Hagdoma, how do you call it, the introduction. So it's brought down there in the introduction to the Zohar that Rebbe Chia prepared himself. He fasted a lot and he did all sorts of amazing things. And then he asked that they take him upstairs. And he was so, being as he was Rebbe Chia, there was no problem from immediate point of view. To take him up into Gan Eden was okay. That met all the requirements, because he was like anyway as if he would have been in the Gan Eden below him. So they take Rebbe Chia, and they said, what do you want up here? What's the story? So he said, I want to go up to wherever Rebbe Shimon is, and I want to be with him. I want to discuss with him in Yonim. So they said, oh, Rebbe Shimon. That always happens to be this crazy thing. He wants to go up and do it, so they said, oh, that's not so positive. That we're very sorry. We don't know if we can allow that. The Rebbe Shimon has a very, very high place, and he's surrounded by these unbelievable great tzaddikim from all the generations. We don't know if you can make it up there. So he said, okay, what are further requirements? I made a lot of preparations for this going up. I'm prepared to make more. So he did a lot more preparations. And so in the end, they took him up a bit higher, and they said, you'll be able to sort of see, as it were, from a distance, Rabbi Shimon. So he gets up a bit higher, and all of a sudden he hears a voice go out. And the voice says that anybody who hasn't reversed the bitter into the sweet, or he hasn't reversed the darkness into light, he can't come up here. Not able to do that. So the Rebbe Chia said he doesn't want to vouch for himself, but he thinks maybe he's partially, or he's at least worked in that field. So they say, you know what, we'll let you up for a little while. And he got up and he was able to stand by the feet of Rebbe Shimon, Rebbe Chia, yeah. There was a whole miser. Rebbe Shimon said to him certain things, and then they said, you have to go back down now. A whole amazing story. So what did the voice go out and say? The voice said that only if you have reversed the bitterness into the sweetness, and you have reversed darkness into light, then you can come up here. Now that would tend to indicate that the ultimate perfection is that you have to reverse something. You've got to reverse the bitterness into the sweet, and you've got to reverse the darkness into the light. Then you can reach the highest, and then you reach the what we might call the ultimate shleimus. Well, from that it's much, that the whole tachlis is that. So the intelligent reader immediately asks himself, doesn't he? The intelligent reader immediately asks himself, what's the difference between marira lamitko, bitterness into sweet, and darkness into light? And the truth of the matter is, if you want to catch me, if you look in the Zohar HaKodesh over there, it's written the other way around. It's written, first of all, to change the darkness into light, and then the bitterness into the sweet. But Chassidus, whenever Chassidus quotes it, well, I won't say whenever, but on many occasions, it puts the marira lamitka first, and then chasheichel in her. So also, what is the difference between the two? So the Alter Rebbe in Torah, the Alter Rebbe in Torah, in Parsha V'Yechi, the Alter Rebbe says, marira lamitka, to change the bitterness into the sweet, that's your nefesh habamiyas. That's you. That's your, and your nefesh habamiyas, he looks very sweet, you know, he paints all sorts of beautiful pictures of what he's offering you. But really, he's offering you the episode, marinas. It's just, it looks very attractive. And there's a whole thing in Tanya, you know, the Moshe, the Zayna HaKodesh, you know, that she came down, and her whole job is only to make everything look sweet, you know. Oh, really, that's not good. So you got to change the whole Nefesh HaBamis into something else, reversing, from bitterness into sweet. And sweet is divinity. Sweet is Elikut. Change into the Nefesh Elokis. Make the Nefesh HaBamis reverse himself, that he goes into the Nefesh Elokis. The second thing is, says the Alter Rebbe, chashoichel in hoira, means to change the world, to alter the world, and change the choshech and the bitterness of the world into light. So has anybody got any ideas about the order? Why is it sometimes, first of all, shekel in her, and afterwards that? Sometimes we mention that first and that first. Nobody's got a chabatz chachab.
Sometimes it's straight atzmach tchila, and after the world. But
very good.
It depends on the door.
Only sometimes.
Sometimes.
Very good. So the Chabadska word is that you can't always wait until you're perfect. You can't always wait till you're finished with yourself. Sometimes you've got to be ready to give of yourself to the world and alter the world. You had to go out and with time. And then later you worry about yourself. You're not allowed to not worry about yourself as well. But sometimes you have to be prepared to put others first. And also on a more personal level, it's sometimes like that. Sometimes you have to worry about the other guy first. And then your own job becomes somehow more elevated and more easy. So it depends. That's what's written in the Zohar there. So from that it comes out that the whole ultimate perfection is to reverse something, to take something which is inherently not, and not just to be mavatla, not just to push its head down, but to reverse it altogether, to alter it completely. Comes along Chassidus, and Chassidus said that if I change the darkness into light, then I get a much greater light than what I had before I started. And the same with the Nefesh Elokis. There's a whole new addition into the Nefesh Elokis through the fact that I changed my Nefesh Abam. That increases the light of the Nefesh Elokis incomparably. But if I change darkness into light, then I get a much greater light. Yisron ha'oyer min ha'choisha. It's an open pasuk in Koheles. What's wrong with him? He got driven away. An open pasuk. An open pasuk in Koheles. Yisron ha'oyer min ha'choisha. If you alter the choshek, then you get a higher oil. Now the reasons for that I could go into, but it's a rather delicate topic. But let's just assume that that's the case. And on another occasion I can maybe go into that. But this is not a shiur in that Indian mamish, but it is.
Why not?
So we'll just assume that it's got to do it. So I get a much greater oil if I alter and I change the choisha. So now that would appear in Hampshire Bossi Lagani from the Frierdiker Rebbe and all the Maimon of the Rebbe on that Hampshire. It would appear that that is one of the main purposes, or is the main purpose of the whole creation. Hashem created the world in order that there be choisha. Move up. I don't like having to, turn over my shoulder.
Why is the
It's written in Tanya, B'Shem HaZoya, Commander Shoda Basa Kaspoi, like the man who throws over his shoulder.
We were just learning that.
Isn't Mela? It would appear that one of the whole purpose, if not the central purpose of the whole creation. So when we think Adam Morrison, Hashem created him, he didn't have any darkness, and he was meant to live forever, Adam Morrison. The Chet was what brought about the Inyan of Nisa. Adam Morrison was supposed to live Li'elam. What's with you today, Levi?
I thought only 1,000 years, no?
Hey, you got a headache or something?
Oh, forever.
It's a Mela.
We need Urbi Mate.
We'll come to that. Mela. Adam Morrison meant to live forever. So where's the choshek? No choshek there. So we have to say that Hashem foresaw and Hashem took into account when he created the world that there's going to be a Yerida. Before the Yerida, there was no choshek. There might have been night, but no choshek. Because there's a big machlokes, when I say big, there's a machlokes, what was brought down by the Abarbanel and other great early period commentators as to whether choshech is just an absence of light or whether choshech is a separate creation all the time. In other words, the choshech is a very unfortunate entity in its own right. So it would appear, sometimes Chassidus follows this way, and sometimes it follows that way. But ultimately, Chassidus holds that choshech is really a bria.
What?
Oh, but that's only when choshech gets made. Choshech mitzadatz, the way it was in the creation, was only that Hashem wanted certain times the sun wouldn't be shining. And therefore it was nighttime. Oh, but when man sins, or when he does other inyanim which are not really what are expected of man, well, that brings choshech into the world. And that brings a entity which blocks and interferes and becomes a serious and very, very anti-move to everything that Hashem really wants in the bit. And that's called choshev. So that's the choshev that you got to be mahafid. You got to take that and you got to change it. You got to alter it altogether into life. You follow? So it comes along the Zohar HaKodesh here in Pasha Yisrael. And it says that when Yisrael came, he did an amazing thing. And that all the worlds and everything literally were elevated and illuminated, and were all full of harikot, chedva, v'simcha, when Yisrael came. So you might say, Shalom Aleichem, you know, what's so great about Yisrael? You know, the other Rabbi, even further, the Zohar finishes by saying that if it hadn't been for the fact that Yisrael came, there wouldn't have been able to be Matan Torah.
What?
And only after Yisrael came, then it was possible to give the Torah. So the eyes jump out on stalks. Here we got 600,000 Yidden.
What do we need Yisrael for?
And they've all said Na'aseh v'nishma. And they're all ready to receive the Torah. And Hashem can't give the Torah, in inverted commas, can't give the Torah till this Yisrael, till he comes along. You follow? So I thought the Shaila, you know, what is so wonderful about Yisrael?
Yeah.
What is so powerful about him? We had to wait for him until Yisrael showed up, then we could give the Torah. As they say in the modern Hebrew, Ma yesh. We have to say like this, take a look at Yisrael. Yisrael, as I pointed out at the beginning, he was the living embodiment of all the so-called, you know, elevated intelligentsia of the Avodah Zorah of the Goyim. Would you call that light or darkness?
Darkness.
Das ist Choshev. Or Zeh Choshev Hamidi. Zeh Choshev Hamidi, that it's a Matthias. It's not just the absence of light. This is a Matthias. And it's very damaging. It's a, how do you call it, a Matthias with a fist. Yeah. So Yisrael represents all that. All of a sudden, what does Yisrael do? He leaves everything behind. He leaves Paro, he leaves all the tremendous position, all the mises, and he comes out to Moshe Rabbeinu. Yeah, in the desert. El Midbar, Asheru Chayna Shom Har Elokim. Here's Yisrael. And it's written that he met up with Moshe Rabbeinu and he heard what Moshe Rabbeinu had to say to him. And then it's written that Yisrael was Moida, Adikot, Hu Hodah. And he said, now I realize at this moment that Hashem is the Emasa Elokim. Yeah? Now I realize that. At this moment. In other words, he was Moida, that everything he had represented, Atkan, was Choshev, in a very bad way. And so he said, Ani Modeh Harikot, I admit, and I give myself over in a way that everything I represented was not on. Harikot, very, very hapach of everything man is supposed to represent. I'm Makabel. And so the Zohar Kodesh says that the Hoidoah of Yisrael, or that caused the Istalke, Yekor the Kutsha Barichu, yeah, B'chulu Amin. Where have you seen that expression before?
Tanya, Kaddish.
In the Basi Lagan, there's an old saying that where does a Chosid Shabbat, where does he know a Zohar from? You saw it in Chassidus. All the world lit up with this unbelievable light, and that came down, and that made that he was able to cause Matan Torah, or make Matan Torah able to happen. Mashma that Helikud Yisroi held